This is the Unicus Radio Network.
Sound for your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul.
From beyond the Twilight Zone, past the outer limits of reality, you're listening to the Unicus Radio Hour with your host, Robert Stanley.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Unicus Radio Hour. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. It is a pleasure to be with you again, and I hope you're doing well. It's a wonderful Wednesday, December 4th, 2013. And the comet Ison apparently fizzled out. Not much to see there. So that's good news, I suppose. For those of you who are comet watchers. Comments on the comet. How about that? Any comments on the comet? Please call our studio line at area code 202-607-9935. That's 202-607-9935. Or you can Skype me at Unicus Editor. That's spelled U-N-I-C-U-S Editor. I'm also getting your emails. Thank you very much. Editor at unicusmagazine.com. So, our special guest tonight is actually a return guest, and we affectionately call him Dr. J. And he's here to give us an update on the work that he's been doing with people who hear voices. So, Dr. J, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be back, Robert.
Yes, it's good to be above ground, I think, and every day is a good day if you're above the ground, I suppose. But apparently not if you're a schizophrenic, and that's one of the things that you've been dealing with exclusively. At least that's one of the things that brought us together. You were telling me about some of the most amazing work that you've been doing. But for people who don't know about you, could you please give us a little background on, without giving away too much about your identity, could you just kind of bring people up to speed who've never met you or heard about you before?
Okay, I can tell a little bit. I'm still working at a large hospital emergency room surrounded by psychiatrists, so I'm keeping my identity down right now. Mm-hmm. My background is I've graduated from a major university on the East Coast with 4 year undergraduate degree in psychology. I have 4 years of graduate work in counseling. And I guess most important is the frontline experience. I've got over 35 years of working in different frontline clinical settings, starting with a state hospital, one of the largest in the world, where I spent 7 years trying to understand schizophrenics and what these voices they were hearing were. From there, I moved and went to work in the psychology department of a very large state prison, and again was working with psychotics and schizophrenics. I spent maybe 16 years or more in the state prison, but I had a lot of latitude to experiment, to talk to them about the voices and spend a lot of time with them, much more than I have working in the emergency rooms. It was there where I learned the most about what these voices were and how they operated. And I've worked in mental health centers, one of the largest in the Midwest. I've worked in two large hospital emergency rooms doing psychiatric crisis. I see more schizophrenics in a month than most people see in their lifetime. And when I first started out, I didn't understand them at all. I had a great interest in abnormal psychology, and I actually taught abnormal psychology in a large community college and won an award for it. I got the Meritorious Service Award for the state that I was employed by. And I ended up working in one of the largest state hospitals in the world. I mean, there were like 27,000 patients there when I got there. Proposition 13 swung through some years afterward, and it kind of really bubbled down the population. But one of the first things I noticed is that my frontline experience, I mean, being there with the schizophrenics, did not match a lot of what I was being taught in college or graduate school. I'm going to kind of go back a little bit. One of the first things was, it was a Dr. Freud story where I remember the professor in a big lecture saying that schizophrenics were too disorganized to do any kind of complex planning. One of the first things I saw, and there were several stories like this that kind of flew in the face of what they were teaching. There was this one psychiatrist at the state hospital who dressed and acted like Dr. Freud. They didn't have the best quality psychiatrists there, but this guy smoked a pipe, he had a beard, and he acted like Dr. Freud. We thought he was a little bit strange. But he had a schizophrenic patient who didn't like him very much. And one day, that schizophrenic patient, who lived on the third floor of the psychiatric unit, at 3 in the morning, made it down past 3 attendance stations, manned attendance stations, made it to this psychiatrist's office door, picked the lock without anybody noticing, got up on his desk, and sat right in the middle of the desk, pulled down his pants, and took a dump right in the middle of his desk. And not only did he do that, he then got down and he shaped it into a pipe.
Oh, my God.
That this guy smoked, and then he escaped from the hospital. And they never found him again.
Wow.
So this is one of the things where, oh yeah, so schizophrenics can't plan anything, huh? They're too messed up to plan anything. That was a very complex plan.
Yeah.
3 floors, 3 manned floors, 3 stairwells, breaking into the guy's office, closing the door, and then somehow getting out of the hospital and never being found again. So there were story after story after story. This is just one example where once I got out onto the front lines and started looking at what was actually happening.
Sorry, hang on.
All right.
God, okay, I'm having a problem with Skype. Go ahead. Go ahead. Resume.
Okay. Yeah, it didn't match what they were teaching. So I got a bit suspicious. I didn't. One of the main things I didn't like about psychology was, when you study it, you have to take their word for what's going on because you don't have access to clinical populations. Psychology students, undergraduates, may never see a schizophrenic. They may never get into a state hospital. They may never get into a psych ward of a prison. They just have to take the word of what these guys are writing about. So the next thing I noticed was that psychiatrists were being assaulted at the state hospital at a much higher rate than almost any other medical staff. And I found that fairly strange, and I didn't know why. But, the central kitchen where we all ate dinner at this hospital was like the center of the grapevine. And you would hear of psychiatrists being assaulted by psychotic patients, periodically at a much higher rate than they would assault counselors or psychologists or psych nurses. Which I found very strange, and sometimes they hurt them. I mean, they hurt them, beat them up pretty good.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what to make of that. I mean, why psychiatrists? And then I noticed that schizophrenics were not taking their medicines, and I didn't know why. I mean, there were 2 groups of patients that didn't take their medicines. One were the bipolar guys who got manic, and they loved the manic phase. That was great. You can understand that. They get high, they have tons of energy, they get bubbly. That sounds like fun, but not schizophrenics. I mean, they don't take their meds, and their life turns into a living hell. And after a while, I found myself being a glorified babysitter with a graduate degree, watching these guys to make sure they took their meds. And so we'd sit there and watch them, and there were signs of them starting to fall apart, starting to decompensate. And we would know that they didn't take their pills. They would take them and they would put them under their tongue and fake like they swallowed them, and then spit them out later.
Right.
So that was the other thing that I didn't understand. I mean, I was real disappointed that I went through all that schooling and ended up as a glorified babysitter for schizophrenics who weren't taking their meds. But without their meds, this became very strange. Without their meds, they became very self-destructive. They became assaultive. They were getting in fights with people. They dropped classes. They had nightmares. They were hearing these horrible voices. They were paranoid. Their life just started falling apart. So what's with that? They were actually choosing to return to psychosis, to the hell of psychosis. Why would they do that? And on top of that, they became very self-destructive. They would cut on themselves. They would try to kill themselves. They would sabotage their classes. They would get thrown out of buildings. The police would have to come. They'd alienate their families. I mean, it was just like their whole world was collapsing into a pile of crap. And they would choose this over taking their medications. And it's like, why? Why are they doing this? So when I first started working with these guys, I didn't like it because I didn't understand what they were doing, why they were doing it, why they kept going off their meds and decompensating into psychosis, and why they preferred psychosis to not taking their meds. Why? I mean, psychosis is much worse than the side effects of the meds. So one day I was walking through one of the psychiatric units, and there was a banister that ran from the second floor down to the first floor. It was a hollow pipe, steel pipe. And the top of that pipe on the second floor had been cut off. Nobody ever thought anything of it. You just go. There was a cap on the bottom part. And I was walking through that unit one day, and here was a maintenance man with a cutting wheel, and he was cutting off the cap on the bottom. And I don't know why I stopped. It was something like, I stopped and watched him. And, normally I wouldn't pay much attention to something like that, but I just stopped and watched. And when he cut that cap off, out of that banister came thousands of pills. Where over the years, these guys have been sticking all their pills down into the banister. And they just came out like a gumball machine.
Wow.
Just pouring out like a Niagara Falls of pills, and they just all over the floor. And I'm sitting there with my mouth open looking at this. Every single pill was a vote by a psychotic patient to remain psychotic. Mm-hmm. And I stooped down and I looked at the pills, and most of them were antipsychotics, and then there was a lot of the other pills for bipolar, lithium and that kind of stuff, but most of them were for antipsychotic medications. I mean, you look at this and you go, why? Why are they doing this? Why are they stuffing their medicines in there and going psychotic, and going through that hell? So that was a burning question. It just wouldn't let up. Why are they doing this? Why? So I started asking psychiatrists, why are they doing this? Every psychiatrist I ran into, scores of them over the years there, and psych nurses. And there were three standard answers I got. One, well, that's just a symptom of the disease. And then there was stuff like, well, they're crazy. That's why they're doing that. Mm-hmm. And the third one that made some kind of sense were the side effects of the medications.
Right.
They're not great. The side effects are not real comfortable. But they give you dry mouth and interfere with sexual functioning, and they kind of dope you up a bit. But they adjust to it after a while. So you compare that, okay, so you got those side effects compared to the hell of psychosis and your whole life just crumbling, and the voices coming and the paranoia and the self-destructiveness. I mean, it just didn't make any sense that they would choose the hell of psychosis, over taking their meds.
Right, and they clearly knew the difference between the two.
Oh yeah, they've been there before.
Yeah.
They know what it was like to relapse into that, And they kept doing it anyway, and it was like, it puzzled me.
Yeah.
Like, why? Why are they doing this?
So what did you come up with an answer as to why they were not taking the meds?
Well, I came to the point where I gave up with asking psychiatrists, because what was odd was they would say, well, it's a symptom of the disease. And that's where they left it.
Yeah.
It's like that's no answer.
Yeah.
And they weren't curious about it. I was like flabbergasted. How could they be?
Yeah.
So I decided to start asking the patients because I wasn't getting anywhere after scores of psychiatrists and psych nurses. And, I asked the patient, why aren't you taking the medications? And they would say, well, it makes me sedated. I get a dry mouth. It interferes with sexual functioning. I don't like how it feels.
Right.
But then you would say, well, look what happens to you when you lapse into psychosis. The paranoia, the voices, the nightmares, the fights with other people, the fights with your family, isolation, not taking care of yourself, horrible nightmares, suicide attempts increase, physical fights, demons in the dark, concentration goes down the tubes. They can't function.
Right.
So what's worse?
Yeah.
A dry mouth, and a little bit of sedation, or this hellish psychosis. So that questioning went on for a long time, and I didn't get a good answer. It might have been a year or two before one day I was talking to a schizophrenic girl in my office with her mother there, and the mother and I both asked her, why aren't you taking your medications? And she says, because the voices told me not to. They say it's poison. And what they were doing was the voices were pointing to the side effects of the medications and using that as proof, saying, well, listen, look what's happening. You're feeling groggy, your mouth is dry, you're being poisoned by the psychiatrists. So that clicked in my head and went, maybe that's why psychiatrists are getting the crap beat out of them by these things.
Yeah.
They didn't like psychiatrists, and they didn't like their medications. So once that one girl told me that, I started asking other schizophrenic patients, and say, hey, the voices telling you anything about your medications? And lo and behold, the answers started pouring in. Yeah, the voices are telling me they're poison, not to take them. The psychiatrist is poisoning you, So then the question begs to be answered is what kind of disease would tell the patients not to take the medications that treat the symptoms of the disease?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of anything like that? It's outrageous.
Yeah.
No other disease does this. Diabetes doesn't tell the patient not to take insulin,
Yeah.
And it's like, so what is going on here? And what is this thing doing, telling patients not to take the pills that, alleviate the symptoms? So, one night, after puzzling on this and keep getting the same answers, the voices are telling me the voices. I'm going, what the devil are the voices? What are these things? So one night I was sitting out on the back porch. I lived on a lake at the time, and I prayed and I said, dear Lord, what are these things? Show me what these things are. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, after I got off of work, it was pretty stressful. I'd go swimming at night in the lake, and it was peaceful. And in the summer, it was like bath water, and it was very, very calm and relaxing. And I got into this meditative stroke one time, and I just kept going and going and going. And I got the breathing right, and everything was working right, and I was just cutting through that water. And then I started getting tired and stopped and looked up, and I was far from the shore, and I was dead tired. I'd just kind of overdone it a little bit. But I'd had years of scuba diving. I had a lot of good training at the university, half year of skin diving, another half year of scuba. And I wasn't worried about it. You go into the survival float kind of thing until you rest up and get your energy and then go back. So what you have to do for the survival float thing is to put your hands behind your back, float like a dead man, and then whip your head up, blow out the air, and then you start sinking. And as you're sinking, you suck in, fill your lungs again, but you still bob underwater for, 2-3 feet before you float back up again like a dead man. Your head is still in the water. And when you run out of breath, you whip your head up again and do the same thing. But each time you sink and then bob back up to the surface. So here I am doing that, and all of a sudden comes this intrusive thought that was kind of strange. I mean, I wasn't worried about drowning at all. It just didn't even cross my mind. And here comes this thought train that goes, hey, you're far from the shore. Yeah, okay. And it's late at night, and the lights are going out, and I could look and see that, people were turning their lights off, so it was getting a little more difficult to see the shore. And it says, well, you're too tired to make it back to the shore. And what was happening was a yes set. Salesmen use these things. It's like, you get the guy to answer yes, 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 and then you hit them with another question that they already got the yes set rolling, and like, hey, would you like to buy this contraption? Yes. Okay. But this thing was saying, and you're going to drown. And I'm like, where the hell did that come from? I wasn't worried about drowning. I still wasn't worried about drowning. And it was like, where did that come from? So as I'm sinking for one of the breaths, here I come back, and it always happened on the surface. It didn't happen underwater. As I came back up to the top again, it said, you're sinking, and yeah, I was sinking as you normally do, and bob back up again. And it goes, see, you're going to drown, using the sinking as evidence that I was heading for the bottom. I'm like, what the hell is this thing? So I decided I'm going to spite it. And so here I am about 11:30 at night out in the middle of the lake, dark, the water was bath warm, and I let more air out just to spite it. And then you hit a certain depth, and your lungs crush because of the water pressure. And I started sinking very quickly. And given the circumstances, I started back up to the surface. And even before I got there, I go, I know what that is. That's the crush depth. Your lungs are crushed down. You sink quicker. I knew what it was even before I hit the surface. And then the thing says, see, you were heading for the bottom. You're panicking. And I'm like, I'm what? What the hell? I'm panicking? Yeah, you're heading for the bottom. You shot to the top. You're panicking. You're going to drown. And I'm like, what the hell is this? It wasn't me. It was my thoughts. It sounded like my thoughts.
Right.
Just like there wasn't any change in timbre or volume or it's the same kind of thoughts you think every day, only it's like the content was so bizarre. It was like, what? So next time around, here I go. I sink down. I hit the crush depth, and I start heading for the bottom. I'm clearing my ears, so I don't break my eardrums. And I hit the thermocline, and I can feel this cold water creeping up my legs, up to my chest. I'm going, whoa, and shot for the surface again. And even before I got to the surface, I went, okay, I know what that is. It's a thermocline. I've hit the thermocline. And I get to the surface, and here's this thing. See, you're panicking. You shot to the surface, you're panicking, you're far from the shore, the lights are going out, you're too tired to make it so it's running the whole thing over again.
Yeah.
And then ending up with, and you're going to drown. And I'm like, I'm going to what? What the hell? So down I go again to spite it. So this time, hit the crush depth, go through the thermocline, and usually the thermocline sits on the bottom. It's cold water that sinks. This one was not on the bottom. It was floating above the bottom. So I went all the way through the thermocline, and I'm heading down, and I don't even know how deep it was, but passed through the thermocline and then hit this creepy, icky feeling started coming up my legs. And I'm like, what the hell? And I thought the bottom of the lake was rock because as far as I've ever walked out into it, it was rock.
Mm-hmm.
But but I sunk into this, I didn't know what it was at first. It kind of took me by surprise. So I started to shoot to the surface again, and it was ooze. It was like, mud, silt.
Yeah.
And I had hit the bottom, but it freaked me out, and I headed for the surface again. And, I was like, that one took me by surprise. And I get to the surface, and here it is again, going, you're panicking. See, you're far from the shore. It runs the whole thing, and this time it adds, and there's a motorboat coming, and it's going to cut you to pieces. And I look off in the distance, and here's a motorboat coming in my direction with that green light. And, I'm like, oh, well, okay, if I need to, I'll dive down underneath it. I've had to do that before. It's no big deal. I'll just head down till it passes over, and then no big, I've done it, a number of times in scuba diving.
Yeah.
So I'm watching this thing, and it's coming, and it was fairly close. I mean, maybe 25, 30 feet away. And the thing is saying, they can't see you. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that. And they're heading straight for you, and it looked like they were, and I'm going, well, just dive down under. And it's going, they're going to cut you to pieces. They can't even see you. And here I am watching this thing with such intensity as it goes by that I wasn't paying any attention to the wake that the motorboat kicked up. So Here I am sucking in a breath of air, and that wake hits me, and I suck in a mouthful of water, and I start choking, and that thing just loved that. It was like, see, you're drowning, you're panicking, you're coughing, it's only you're on your way to the bottom, you'll be done for. And I'm like, what the hell is this thing?
Yeah.
So I spit out all the water and cleared my throat, and then went down again and stuck in the mud at the bottom, and just laid there. I mean, so my knuckles were like, floating about 6 inches above the mud. My feet were stuck in the mud. It was so bath water warm that all the senses were cut off. There was no sight. There was no sound. There was no feel. It was like something had removed all the senses. And in the dark, I was kind of scared in the dark in the bottom of the lake. I was waiting for something to come and grab me, as weird as that might have been. So I'm like waiting for something to grab me, and so I wasn't thinking anything. I was just kind of trying to sense things. So even my mind had shut down as I'm waiting for something. I don't know what it was, and it was the most incredible experience. I was aware that I was aware, and that's all there was. It's like once you shut down all the senses, there's this just raw awareness, And it was like a peak experience. I'll never forget it. And when I got to the surface, that thing had gone. And I never heard anything like it again. That's what the voices sound like. They sound just like your own thoughts, but the content is not something you would normally think or act upon. So the average guy can relate to it as an intrusive thought. So you're standing on a bridge, and all of a sudden this thought pops into your head, why don't you just jump over? I wonder what it would like to be to jump off this bridge. Mm-hmm. Or you're driving your car, and here's this thought, hey, why don't you just, what would it be like to drive off the mountain? Why don't you just turn the wheel and drive off the mountain? And people are horrified at these thoughts. I mean, I was talking to one of the psych nurses the other day. She was on the fourth floor of the parking garage, and one came up to her and said, why don't you jump off? And of course she was horrified, and that's them putting these thoughts into your head, and you know that they don't belong to you.
Right.
It is not something that you would normally think, and certainly for most of us, it is not something you would act on. But you're horrified that you even thought it.
Right.
And you know it's not your thought. That's them. That's the voices. Those are the archons. Yeah. And, I was talking to Sherry about this, and she wrote back. I have a little note here. She wrote back to me. I said, this is what I'm planning to talk about on Robert's program. What do you have to add, if anything? And this is what she wrote back. She said, the entities, however, love it when a person is stressed. It's a perfect opportunity for them to infiltrate the mind with thoughts that would not ordinarily be there, and that is their MO. Now, Sherry, when she was younger, she was schizophrenic, but she beat that thing on her own. She found out that these things were entities that were infiltrating her thoughts, and she became a very successful civil engineer in charge of multi-billion-dollar projects. She goes on to say, if a person has thoughts that they recognize they would not think themselves, this is confirmation that the thoughts are not theirs. So if the thoughts are not theirs, then whose thoughts are they?
Yeah.
If a person can get to that point of thinking, it is much easier to get rid of the entities. She said, the main thing a person must ask themselves is this: are these my thoughts, or do they belong to something else? She said that the person's psyche will always answer accurately. However, the entities will also try to answer, but their answers will be very Monty Python-like, in that they are absurd, and will respond something like, yeah, these are your thoughts. She said, this is confirmation that these are not your thoughts.
Right.
You know, the psyche will say, yes, these are my thoughts, because the psyche is you.
Right.
She said, I know if a person has thoughts they recognize as not their own and try to make them go away, the thoughts will ramp up. And I see that with schizophrenics all the time. They tell me, oh, I can handle this, I just ignore them. No, they get louder. They will not be ignored. And that's one of the markers I use, you know, because there's a lot of, especially in the prison, the prisoners would want any kind of tranquilizer they could get. So it became my job to ferret out who was really psychotic and who was not. You know, so the ones who needed the medications were getting them, and the scammers who were just looking for drugs, you know, were cut out. So I had to know the difference. So Sherry says, asking the rose or some other spiritual guide, the higher self, to collect the thoughts that don't belong to you and return them to where they come from. She says that works for her.
Yeah, I was heard something the other day about people that come into the prison system because they've committed some sort of violent act and they try to claim insanity. Is it possible to fake schizophrenia, or is there a way you can detect it?
Oh yeah. I mean, they fake schizophrenia. I mean, even now, working in the ER, you have these homeless people come in, and I had one last night. He comes in, and I look at him, and I could tell he was an ex-prisoner. He had all the tattoos and stuff.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm hearing voices, and the voices are telling me to kill myself and other people." And I said, "Well, what else are they telling you?" "That's it." I said, "No, that's not all they say." And he was stumped. He said, "Well, they're telling me to kill other people." I'm like, "Yeah? What else do they say?" And he couldn't come up with an answer.
Uh-huh.
So if they don't give any more details, now the ones who are truly psychotic, they will say, "Well, the voices run me down. They tell me that I'm no good, I'm rotten, I'm evil, I'll never amount to anything, to kill myself, that I'm a burden on other people." So they are consistently negative.
Yeah.
Consistently, and very seldom, if ever, are they positive. Mm-hmm. So that flew into the face of what psychiatrists are saying too, that these things are hallucinations. So you go, okay, hallucinations are random. They're as individual as the person.
Yeah.
Okay. So one guy hallucinates that he's seeing this, and another guy hallucinates. All those hallucinations are different. Not these things. These are very consistent, and they have a very consistent pattern to them. But they're not looking at that.
Yeah.
There is no course on what the voices say or how they operate or what they are. They are just basically dismissing them as hallucinations, which is a humongous mistake.
Yeah. Because
they are driving the schizophrenia. You get rid of the voices, and the schizophrenia is gone.
Yeah.
The only reason their medicines work is because it calms the person down, and it makes it harder for the voices to get them upset. Now, there's a reason why the voices are wanting them upset.
Sure.
Right. But Here's the psychiatry saying they're hallucinations. They're hallucinations. Now, on the other hand, when I was started working with patients in depth at the state hospital, if they thought that I thought that these things were hallucinations, they would clam up. They wouldn't tell me anything. It's like they just shut me off. But if I treated them as if they were real, and asked them, what about this? What about this? They would give me more information. But the voices would get upset at them because they were giving that information, and sometimes they would get very angry. They would get agitated. They'd yell at me.
Wow.
The voices would tell them not to answer, but they did anyway. And piece by piece, I got these little scraps of information that I would feed them, and they would go, "Oh, yeah, new patients." And some of these guys paid the price for giving me that information because the voices beat the crap out of them.
Wow.
So, it's like the psychiatrist. Once they, one of them told them that, hey, he was asking me questions about the voices, and it really pissed me off and got me really angry. They'd come down on me and say, you're reinforcing the hallucinations by asking them questions about them. You're making them worse. And I'm going, what are you talking about? They get upset, but the psychiatrists were terrified that they would get violent because once they're unpredictable. And the way I was raised, that didn't faze me. It's like I was always a adrenaline junkie, and I kept picking at their heads, and they would get mad, and several times they told me, "You're reinforcing the hallucinations. You're making them worse. You're causing us more trouble. They're hallucinations. Forget it. Stop asking questions about it." But they, hallucinate. Like I said, hallucinations are random. These things are not random. They follow the very precise pattern.
Yeah, there's the signs of intelligence there.
Yes, and that I kept blocking that out. You hit it right on the head. I kept blocking that out. How could this be? How could this be?
Yeah.
And the voices were consistently negative. They would open up if I treated them like they were not hallucinations. They would open up bit by bit by bit.
Yeah.
And then when I got to the prison, I had a lot of time to experiment with these guys. And there was one patient. He was a prisoner who. I would just tell him to do the opposite of everything that the voices told him to do. And I told him, I said, listen, if you feel like you're going to cave into him, come to my office. I'll make time for you.
Uh-huh.
So one day he comes in and he goes, he's fighting them. He's taking his meds. He's not doing what they say. And he comes in and he goes, the voices are really getting pissed off at you, and do you realize what you're doing is dangerous? And I went, well, I suppose so. And he just kept getting better. And then one day he comes in and he goes, the voices want to talk to you. And they'd never talked to me directly before. They would come through the patient and say, hey, he's stupid, he's a jerk, he's crazy. And he'd tell the patient that, and I'd ask the patient, what are they telling you? Well, they're telling me you're stupid, you're a jerk, you're crazy, don't listen to you, get away from you. And that was pretty consistent too. One day, it was always through the guy. It's like you had to ask him. He was like the interpreter.
Yeah.
But when they come up and they say, we want to talk to you directly, that had never happened before.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what the devil is going on now? So I said, okay, what do they have to say? And I'll never forget this. He said, out of his mouth come these words, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I'm like, whoa! It blew my mind.
Yeah.
It's like our way of life. That wasn't coming from the guy.
Yeah.
It's plural. Our way of life. And it's like, it was like a warning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Knock it off. Knock it off. And I wasn't willing to do that. And I responded something like, "You have no right to destroy these people. To suck them dry and destroy their lives."
Yeah.
And it's like, but that rung my head when that came through. It just spun my head, and I was like, I went into a daze after that guy left. So.
It's rare to catch them in a moment of honesty like that, but they obviously felt threatened by what you're doing. They probably still do, and like to do you harm. I know they came after me with a vengeance when you first contacted me, and I agreed to help you. Mm-hmm. Man, I mean, they were just kicking the crap out of me. And
they've done that to me more than once.
I'm sure they have. Well, you're like they said. From their perspective, you have no right, and I suppose I have no right either. From their perspective, we are kind of violating their territory or threatening their existence. So, of course, when you threaten something's existence, it's going to fight back for survival, right?
Yeah, and I can go into this later, but we're also threatening their food supply.
Well, I think that was
what they live off.
I think that was what was implied there. And there's a lot of different sources that you and I have been documenting that that's just verification of what people from various cultures around the world have said over time about these things that they do feed off of us. I got news for you here that this is going to become a mainstream topic in the near future if the History Channel has its way. Like they did the Ancient Aliens. Well, this is really weird. I saw this, the other day. Now, History also did a miniseries that actually got very high ratings called The Bible. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I've been watching it.
Yeah, me too. It's it's kind of violent, but okay, whatever. So their next project, okay, it may not happen, but what it says is they're exploring a project about Jesus that would portray him in a more controversial light. It says they are still finalizing the deals, but the featured writer would be a guy named Scott Kozar, who worked on something called The Machinist, producers Eli Roth and Eric Newman. And it would be titled The Lost Years, which I find intriguing, because nobody knows for sure, or at least officially nobody knows where he was for that time. But it says it explores the undocumented years of Jesus' life as a young adult. And it says there's very little information about Jesus' life from the age of 13, following a pilgrimage to Jerusalem with his parents, to age 30 when he began his ministry and was baptized by John the Baptist. And this project is still in very early stages, and it's unclear whether it would be developed as a regular series or a mini-series. But this thing, The Lost Years, is based on an original idea by Kozar, who developed it with Roth and Newman, all three having strong horror film backgrounds. Okay, such as Kozar co-wrote the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Amityville Horror, The Crazies, and Roth and Newman jointly produced the Last Exorcism franchise in addition to their own horror credits. And it says this is not a coincidence, nor is Roth and Newman's exorcism connection. Wait a minute, let me finish. It says here that The Lost Years was conceived in the horror genre, and it explores a theory about Jesus' origins as an exorcist. It says, although the practice of ridding a person's body of demons and evil spirits existed long before Jesus' time, the term exorcism, which is done in Jesus' name, wasn't coined until later. In ancient times, when medicine was in its infancy, healing was done mainly on a spiritual level, essentially treating ailments by getting demons out of the body. So I find that pretty fascinating. If they actually go forward with that, it may cause a lot of people to ask questions that I think needed to be asked.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, with the movie thing, you look at Frankenstein. You look at the vampires.
Yeah.
The vampire. There's, it's like the subconscious knows that there's something feeding on us or suspects it.
Right.
And then you got the exorcism, and you got those kind of, it's like, the subconscious knows there's something out there. There's something doing these things.
Right, but it's not exactly out there if it's talking to you in your head. It's attached to us on some level, like a parasite would do, attaches itself and feeds off the host, and we are hosting them mostly unaware. And that's what intrigues me, is how they can be so stealthy. But, again, the analogy I've used for years about this is like a tick. It can bite you. Oftentimes they will bite you, and you will not even feel it. That's a pretty good trick, but they can do it. So I have a feeling that these things, whatever they are, and there's probably more than one kind, but I thought it was also very instructive when you were told you have no way of interfering with our life. It reminds me of what happened when Jesus cast demons, plural, out of this guy, right, and cast him into a herd of pigs. They said, we are legion, right?
I've had one tell me that one time when I asked it what it was, and it said, we are legion. I said, well, like in the Bible. And then it says, what are you going to do? Cast us into a herd of pigs?
Okay. So they remember that.
They were aware of that, and I said, well, you drowned the pigs last time, and then you were free again.
Well, not really, because they need a host. They need a host to work with. And see, now that's the other thing that blows my mind. How many demons can a person actually have?
Hundreds.
Really?
I've had patients. Oh yeah, and the more they have, the worse off they are. If they have a handful, I mean, you can get rid of those, but hundreds. Some of them, and these are the guys that are really bad off.
I guess so.
They're really, the more they have, the worse off they are.
Wow. Well, in some ways, it's like the blind leading the blind. If you think about it, if everybody is infected to some degree, or affected with an A, affected by these entities, these parasitic entities, the archons, whatever you want to call them, demons, it would make sense that the so-called medical professionals are incapable of helping their fellow man because they themselves are under the influence to some degree.
Well, you would think so with psychiatry, not allowing you to even look into what they are.
Right.
If my boss knew what I was saying right now, I would be labeled as schizoaffective and probably be fired. Because it is not within the realm of norm. But I'll tell them they're barking up the wrong tree unless they start turning around and looking at these things and how they operate. They're never going to cure schizophrenia. The only reason their medicines work is because it calms the patient and it makes it harder for these entities to get them upset. They have to get them upset to drain that energy. And you talk to schizophrenics, and this is one thing I talk to a couple of the psychiatrists about. One of the markers I've used in the prison is after the voices hit the person very hard, you ask them, how do they feel? If they say anything other than I felt depressed and drained and bad, they're lying.
Right.
So that's one of the ways I would catch the scammers, because, the true schizophrenics over the years, I say, how do you feel after the voices hit you? I'm drained. So they turn their emotional state negative, which is why they always, tell them bad things, feed them bad information, tell them to kill themselves, tell them they're rotten, nobody likes them, everybody's talking about them, somebody's going to get at them. That turns their emotional state negative because they use that negative emotional energy. That's what they feed off of. They can't stand positive emotional energy. And you bring a schizophrenic into a church, and he can't stand it. The voices go crazy in there. They'll do one of two things. They'll either shut up if they're not too bad, or they will drive the guy nuts and drive him out. And if the guy decides he wants to stay there, they will make so much noise in his head that he cannot concentrate on what the preacher is saying. So that's another thing I saw at the state hospital. I noticed that on Sundays when all the other patients were going to church, the schizophrenics did not want to go. And everybody else is going, well, we get off the psych ward, we get some fresh air, we go take a ride and enjoy it. And they're going, no, we don't want to go. And I found that very odd, and I had no idea why that was.
Mm-hmm. So do these people that you've dealt with, that we're describing here, have any of them actually visualized or has some kind of way that they can describe what these things are? In other words, do they see them on some level?
Yeah, there's several things they see. They hear them, for one.
Yeah.
And one thing that's strange is that when they get very strong, these things will move from them hearing them inside their head to them hearing them outside their head, like a ghost talking to them from outside. I mean, they'll hear this voice speaking to them, and it originates from outside of their head. It's at that point where the voices feel they have so much control, they don't have to worry about blending in with your thoughts anymore and hiding. So the way I visualize it is there's all these thoughts coming through your head, and these things can bury themselves like a panther in a jungle among all those other thoughts.
Yeah.
And they strike when you get upset. They come out and they go, and they try to get you more upset. And then they feed off of that negative emotional energy.
Right. Yeah.
Now, they do see shadow people, and I'm not quite sure what those things are. They're not good, but they don't seem to directly hurt people. And the meth addicts see those, more than anything else. I remember one prisoner I was talking to who experimented with those. They're three-dimensional shadows. They look like human beings, except you can't see their face, and they're three-dimensional. And he was telling me one time, I asked him, have you ever seen the shadow people? And he goes, yeah, I went out to the desert with a friend, and these guys were injecting amphetamine.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nasty way. I mean, that makes it much stronger. And I was talking to them about the shadow people and what these things were and how they operated, and he said, well, this is what we did to try to find out one time. They went out to the Indian reservation in the middle of nowhere, and they were trying to find out whether they had to be on the amphetamine to see these things, and if so, were they both seeing the same ones?
Yeah.
Okay. So they drive like 20 miles out into the desert, and one guy injects the amphetamine, and he starts seeing these things. So he turns to the other guy who hasn't injected, and he said, do you see that one over there by the tree? And the guy, no. How about the one over there? No, I don't see him. What about this one over here? No. So they determined that they had to be on speed to see these things.
Mm-hmm.
These guys weren't psychotic, but psychotic guys, schizophrenic guys, see them anyway.
Mm.
So the other guy injected, and they were both on amphetamines, and one guy'd point to one and say, do you see that one over there? What's he doing? Well, he's doing this.
Yeah.
So they were both seeing the same thing. Now, I don't know why this happens, but when people who can see these things notice them, they start moving in. It's almost like they know that you see them, and they start moving toward you, and that pretty well frightens most of these guys.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just ignore them. You know, they see them. The prisoners called them the tree people because they sat in the trees. You know, they sat in the roofs. But what happened is these guys, as they're pointing these things out, a circle of these shadow people got all around their truck, you know, and they got scared and they jumped in the truck. So here they are in the truck, and this guy's saying, well, we were still watching them. They're pointing, saying, well, look at that one. And he said at some point the whole back of the truck acted like somebody had dropped a boulder in it. You know? So the truck recoiled, you know, and they turned around, and the whole back of the bed was filled with these things. And I said, what'd you do? And he said, well, we started that truck and drove out of the desert, almost wrecked the truck several times.
Yeah.
And I said, did they follow you? And he said, no, they didn't. So what surprised me there, though, was that I didn't think those things could affect physical reality. You know, I thought they were some kind of spiritual ghost or something.
Yeah.
But when he says that the back of his truck recoiled, you know, I went, whoa, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, they can, and I didn't, you know, that's for the longest time, I didn't feel that these things, even the voices, could affect physical reality until with the same guy where they came through and said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life.
Yeah.
And he warned me. He said, what you're doing is dangerous, and they were saying back off. I didn't back off. So one day, the same guy, he's getting better and better, he comes into the office, and he's got this zombie-like stare, you know, And I'm like, whoa. He sits down, and, I'm asking him, well, what's going on with you? And he's just staring at me with this psychotic type stare. He wouldn't talk, And all of a sudden, to my right, the wall started crackling like an arc welder. It sounded just like an arc welder. And I whip my head over there, and there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back at him, and he's got this, psychotic stare. So I push my chair against the wall, thinking, man, he's going to come at me. This is really weird. And this crackle is moving at a 45-degree angle up the wall to my right, up to the ceiling. And I can't see anything, but it is loud. And then it starts crossing over his head where he's sitting, and then it comes down at a 45-degree angle on the left side of my office, and I'm whipping between looking for whatever's causing this noise and watching him. I was afraid to take my eyes off of him for too long because I was afraid he was going to jump me. And he's just got this psychotic stare, and he's staring at me, and I look at him and I say, do you hear that? And he didn't answer. He's just staring at me. And this thing is coming down to my left, and it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can just inches from my left leg. And I look in there, and there's nothing there. And I look at him, and he's just staring at me. And I'm going, whoa, I'm freaked. I'm totally freaked. What the hell is going on here? And I'm expecting him to jump at me, so I'm getting ready to kick him back if he does. And this thing is crackling in the trash can to my left, and I look down in there, and there is nothing in there. So I look back at him, and he slowly stands up, and he goes, I gotta leave. I'm like, yeah, good, go. I'm thinking, go quick, there. And he stumbles down the hall, and that incident scared me so bad that I didn't call that guy back for like 3 months. I was curious, but I was scared shitless.
Yeah.
And after he leaves, I go and I check all the other offices, and there's nobody there. That part of the building was totally empty. There was nothing that could cause that noise, nothing. And I couldn't think. I was so stunned. I just canceled all my appointments for that day, and I just sat in the office staring out the window going like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
And I was scared half to death because I didn't think these things could do anything in physical reality, and that crackle proved wrong. So I'm going, if they can do that, what else can they do?
Right. Yeah, well, they can certainly affect a person's nervous system. I can attest to that.
Shoot.
I had the same thing when I was dealing with that so-called virus that attacked me when I first met you. It was blocking me, literally preventing me from sitting at the computer. It's like the pain would intensify when I sat at the computer. It was really interesting. But at night, I was having this surging pain, and then at one point, as I was battling it, there was somebody or something in the room that it was the night I believe it really disconnected itself. I don't know if it was something I did or if I was getting assistance or what, but I literally heard, and I saw a flashlight and I heard an electrical crack. That's what it sounded like, a crack. Like you said, like an arc welder. It wasn't a pop. Yeah. It was a crack. Like, and I'm watching this happen. I wasn't fully asleep. You know what I'm saying? I was like in between, and I wasn't dreaming it. I wasn't dreaming it. It was and my wife actually said something to me the next morning, like there was some woman trying to attach something to your head. And I said, no, I don't think so. I think she was actually trying to disconnect something that had been attached to me. And let's take a little break here. All right, folks, we're back. That was The Warmth by Incubus. Hope you enjoyed that little musical interlude. If you'd like to call in to the program, the phone number is area code 202-607-9935. That's 202-607-9935. Or you can Skype me at Unicus Editor. That's UNICUS Editor. Love to hear from you. Don't be afraid. I promise I will not bite. And you can remain anonymous if you're having issues, or you know somebody that's having issues with the schizophrenia or demonic possession, actually. Whatever you want to call it, it's the topic du jour. So don't be afraid, folks. It's fine. You can call in. And the good doctor will help you. Dr. J, are you still with us?
I am.
All right. Wonderful.
So a couple of things you said kind of triggered another couple of thoughts. When you ask the schizophrenics what they think these things are,
Yeah.
they will say demons for the most part.
Really?
Yes. They will say it. Some will say, I don't know what they are, or they're me.
Yeah.
But a lot of them will say demons, and that's what these people have been telling us for hundreds of years.
If not thousands. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So this is a big part of the problem, as I've been telling people now for a few years since I came out with it. I was actually very scared. I thought, well, I mean, who wants to be considered nuts, right, for talking about something like this? But I came to the realization, much like yourself, that these things are not fictional. They're not a fabrication or some hallucination, that they do exist and that they're very harmful, etc. So that's when I started talking about it. And what really kept me going was the response from the audience, various audiences. When I was, if I'm not doing this show, I've done a lot of interviews about it and written some things about it. And in fact, that's how you met me, or we met, because you'd heard me or read something I wrote. And, it gave me confidence to keep speaking out about it until we can resolve the issue. I think actually quite a few people, the more people that speak out or actively doing something about it, I mean, it's not funny at all.
Oh, no.
And I mean, you have to deal with it. I have to deal with it. Everybody who is aware of it, it's simply, you cannot ignore it, and you have to defend yourself against it. In fact, like I was telling you and this audience before, no joke, when Dr. J, when he first contacted me, he wanted to work with me, and I said, sure, great. And oh my God, I mean, it was absolute all-out warfare with these things. And because they were, I don't know, I guess it scared them that you would be giving me information that I would then turn around and share with other people, and vice versa.
No, they did not want that to happen.
No, and so we had to modify our plan of attack in order to survive their, the shit that they were throwing at us. And but at no point in all of this have I ever said, oh, it's not worth it. That's somebody else's problem. Let them figure it out. I've never felt that way, for whatever reason.
And neither have I. I told them they're going to have to kill me to shut me up.
Well,
when that crackling was going on in the office there, I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, I was scared to death. I was losing my mind. I eventually did call that guy back and asked him out of curiosity, probably 3 months later. I said, do you remember the crackling that happened in the office the last time you were here? And he said, yes, but I didn't think you could hear it. And I said, well, what was it? And he said, well, that's a them, referring to the voices.
Yeah.
And I said, what were they doing? He said, they're trying to scare you off. And I said, they did a damn good job.
Right. But it didn't work. It didn't work, did it?
No, it didn't work. But, I asked him afterward. I've been working with this guy for 3/4 of a year.
Yeah.
I mean, we knew each other pretty well. And I asked him, what was going through your head? And what were they telling you when that crackling was going on? And he said, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your belly, which is like a homemade prison knife that they manufacture.
Right.
And I asked him, well, why didn't you do it? And he said, because I couldn't find one. I went, whoa!
Good for you. Lucky you.
Oh, my God.
Hey, we've got a caller here. Dr. J, this is, do you mind if I give your name out, caller?
Of course you can.
All right. Stephen, welcome to the program.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Long time no call.
Yeah.
But I have been supremely busy with the new business. But listen, the subject that you're talking about tonight, that you guys are addressing, is really, really timely. There especially when you talk about the series that they're planning on making for TV about the missing years of Jesus, and how it's going to have a horror side to it. I heard the other day on an interview, and he has a very strong internet presence. He is Reb Yaakov Leib HaKohen, who is in charge of the he is part of the Sabbatai Zvi movement in Judaism. You know, it's been kind of an underground movement for a long time. Back in the 1800s, it was very powerful, very strong, and you know, it's still out there, still busy. But he pointed out something about there is an actual recording in the Midrash about the trial of Jesus before the Sanhedrin. It's actually recorded in there, and it turns out he was tried and crucified not because he proclaimed himself to be the Son of God, because there is no law against such.
Yeah.
You know, that's not one of the Ten Commandments. But what he was tried for and found guilty of was necromancy.
What?
Yeah. And according to this scholar, and he is a scholar, he's very well read and has lots and lots of lectures out there, he said that it was necromancy, was what he was tried for. And of course, necromancy involves dealing with disembodied spirits. And naturally, you know, the New Testament is just rife with recordings of his multiple exorcisms. You know, it was almost an everyday event for him. There's so much of it going on.
Right.
But that was actually, according to the Midrash, that was what Jesus was tried for, found guilty, and eventually crucified, was for necromancy.
Hey,
I thought you'd be interested to know that.
Oh, you better believe it. Could you send me this guy's information so I can get a little more familiar with what he's putting out there?
Well, let me give you his website right now.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
And I'll tell you something else I read that was fascinating, and I believe it was in National Geographic magazine. It was around Easter last year. Is that it actually said in there that Mary Magdalene was possessed by 7 demons that Christ cast out of her, and that's one of the reasons she was following him around all the time. You know, she was extremely grateful.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. Here's the website. It's www. And I'm going to spell this.
Go ahead.
DONMEH-WEST.com.
Okay.
And that is the Neo-Sabbatean Collective of the Internet.
Interesting.
And the gentleman, the scholar is Reb Yaakov Leib HaKohen.
Okay.
And this is full of very well-researched scholarly articles. So
okay.
This guy is he's no kook.
Right. Understood. Did you have anything that you want to say to Dr. J?
Well, Dr. J, of course, I appreciate your work out there, and as a nurse who, while I'm currently on hiatus, focusing all my attention on this project I'm undergoing here and pushing through, I've had a lot of experience with psychotics and schizophrenics, and some of the worst manifestations I've seen have been in people going through DTs. You know, as they withdraw from alcohol, you know, the delirium tremens.
Yeah, those are hallucinations. That isn't the same thing.
Yeah, they're hellish. They're hellish,
yeah.
And to the person going through it, that's not a hallucination at all. You know, they can
real.
They can look at the closet and they see that door opening up, and they see the flames of hell coming up through the open door.
Whoa.
And they see people coming through. You know, they see people coming through, and they'll scream at them. They'll beg for somebody to stop them.
Wow.
And generally, the patient is restrained at this point. You know, they're tied down to protect themselves and to protect the nursing staff and other people who have to take care of them. And you know, they just thrash around violently, and they'll stretch their restraints out and ask this invisible person standing next to them, you know, if you'll just cut these restraints for me. You've got the claws, you can do it.
Oh my God!
You know, I mean, they'll just make that request right out. You know, and the person will just be pouring with sweat. Their heart will be beating 200 and some beats a minute. Their blood pressure is through the roof, and they are in an abject state of terror when they're going through these DTs, and they'll hallucinate the devil, and I've been called the devil so many times by people going through DTs when you personally intervene. You know, they'll see different faces and different forms dominate you. You know, they don't see you, they see someone else. And as far as they're concerned, you are the devil, and they'll tell you as much. And by the time they're all finished with this, when the DTs are finished, and it may take 48 to 72 hours for this, if they survive it, because delirium tremens is a true medical emergency.
Oh, yeah, 1 out of 10 people die.
God.
Yeah, they can drive themselves into a hypertensive episode and stroke out, or they can drive themselves into a tachycardic episode and go into a fatal dysrhythmia, and their heart will collapse, you know, and just stop beating. They do die, you know, people do die, and DT patients are automatically in the intensive care unit until the DTs are passed, because they require that one-on-one, sometimes 2- and 3-on-1 care when they start bucking and getting crazy. But, substance abusers withdrawing from their substance are among the worst, and alcohol, from what I've been able to tell, is, from my experience, is the absolute worst. You know, but interestingly enough, you know, according to this Jewish scholar, Jesus was actually convicted of necromancy.
Wow.
That's
that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Steve.
Oh, you're very welcome, Robert. Good to speak with you again, and I'm going to go ahead and get off the air and let you guys continue to expound on this very important subject.
All right. You be well. Thanks.
Take care.
Absolutely. Bye-bye now.
Bye for now. Yep. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm glad somebody called. Never know who's listening to the program. Man, how in the world did we miss that little bit of history about Jesus? Now I'm starting to wonder where he was those years and what he was doing. It's really got my curiosity up.
Yeah. You know, what Steve said kind of reminded me of another patient. This guy was he was sent to prison for armed robbery and assault, and he was using a lot of cocaine, and he was psychotic. And he told me this story after he recovered. This is one of the guys that, you know, we got rid of the voices and they never came back. But when he was in a recovered state, he said when he was, he lived in San Diego, and he said the voices told him one day that there was a pot field up in Oregon, and they knew where it was. And they said, you know, take all your money. He had like $275 at the time, and they said, come on, we'll show you where it is. So trusting these things, he, you know, took, and they said they wanted him to bring 2 burlap bags, which was interesting. So he followed step by step all the directions that they told him to take from San Diego up into the base of a mountain in Oregon. And the dirt road he was on ran out, and he said, well, okay, what do I do now? The voices said, okay, take your 2 burlap sacks and a knife, and there's a hiking trail off to your left there. Follow that up the mountain. So, you know, he took his burlap bags and a knife, and he went up that trail for 4 hours, and he came upon this huge sesamelia pot field, just like the voices said. And he said, what do I do now? He said, well, the voices told him, cut them down, fill up your sacks, and we know a park where you can go sell the stuff. So he carried down the 2 sacks of marijuana, and he went and he got a hotel, and he started selling this stuff in this park where these things were telling him to sell it.
Wow.
And he made a tremendous amount of money. And I said, well, what'd you do then? And he said, well, I bought all the prostitutes I could afford. He said, I bought all the liquor I could afford. And he said, the voices were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. That threw me for a loop. I never heard anything like that before. So he was out on the Columbia River, and him and the voices were fishing. And he said the voices would tell him where to cast the hook, how long to leave it there, and when to move on. And he said he was the only one on the river that day catching anything. Everybody was looking at him like, how are you doing that?
Wow.
So he caught a bunch of fish, and he did this for like 2 weeks. All the prostitutes he could get his hands on, all the cocaine he could. He was having the life of Riley: alcohol, cocaine, fishing, and prostitutes. And after 2 weeks, he ran out of the marijuana, and he was going to go up there again. And the voices said, "No, don't do that. They're up there waiting for you. If you go up there, they'll kill you.
Yeah.
And take what money you have and turn back around, go to San Diego." And he had like $500 more than he came with. Went back to San Diego, and that was his tale. And I've talked to several prisoners where the voices would tell him which houses to break into, when to break into them, where generally, not specifically, but generally where the loot was, and then where to go to get amphetamine or whatever drug they were abusing.
Right. And I really think that this is happening to people, and they never admit it. People that are in, politicians or other people of authority. I think that they were told to go there and how to behave and do what they have to do in order to infiltrate.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised because people, they don't think about where thoughts come from. They just think they're theirs. And
yeah, but this guy obviously could tell the difference because he didn't. He's talking. If he was being truthful, that he suddenly had thoughts about someplace, a distant location, and he had all this information that there's no way he could simply. That would be his thought process, unless he was a gifted psychic, and even then, it doesn't. I'm saying that doesn't make any sense unless there's an external intelligence guiding him. Is what I take away from that. Yeah. Right.
Well, yeah, and it's strange because there's all kinds of different degrees of awareness.
Yeah.
Where the thoughts come and the people think the schizophrenic thinks the voices are theirs, and that's them. Then there's others that realize that it's not them.
Right. Right.
And then they ask the voices, who are? I remember one guy. He recovered. And then he'd been hearing the voices for years, decades, and they disappeared, and he couldn't, it was like really strange that they were gone. Mm-hmm. So one day he asked them to come back, and then he asked them, who are you? What are you? Mm-hmm. And they said, we'll show you what we are, and they just beat the crap out of him.
Wow.
They just attacked him. He couldn't get out of bed. He missed an appointment. I went to look for him in the prison, and he just looked like hell frozen over laying in that bed. He could not even get up to go to breakfast or the bathroom. They just beat the crap out of him.
Well, I guess I should consider myself lucky I only broke my wrist this year. That was, and it was really, my wife pointed it out to me. She says, well, what do you expect when you start calling them ankle biters? No wonder your feet wouldn't move.
Oh, geez.
It was so literal. It was so obvious, so logical. I'm like, okay, I can't argue with what you just said, but you made me feel like a complete idiot because I knew I could, God.
They bit your ankle good, huh?
Yeah, they bit it so good that I can't. Well, part of the thing was actually I was very tired, and I attributed it to working very hard and everything. But, the truth of the matter was I was being very headstrong and not giving them any kind of respect. I was just going full tilt at them, like take this, you bastards, and I was working overtime to make their life miserable, and so they said, okay, you think you're pretty smart, don't you? Well, let's see what happens if you fall in the tennis court and fracture your wrist. So, Anyway, it's subtle in some people, and it's profoundly overt in others. And this is what my point I was trying to make about the mental health professionals that you work with it's possible that they're hearing a voice in their mind that they think is theirs that's telling them, there's nothing to this. Don't look any further. There's nothing to find.
Yeah, it's so strange. I mean, you see psychologists studying people standing in elevators, the wrong way.
Right.
How many people does it take to look up into the sky to get the rest of the people to look up? I mean, all these ridiculous things.
Yes.
But when it comes to the voices that these schizophrenics have been telling them for hundreds of years they've been hearing, it's like, they're hallucinations. Well, what makes you think they're hallucinations? Well, that's what they are, because we don't understand what they're saying, and it doesn't make any sense. They must be hallucinations. And if you look into it, you're reinforcing their illness, and you're causing more of the problem.
Right, but it's just like the voices tell those who are deeply affected, don't take your meds. They could be saying to the doctors, don't worry about your patients. They're just crazy. There's nothing else you can do about it. They literally, they could be under the influence. In other words, they're manipulating everybody to some degree, unless you're aware of it. And even if you're aware of it, I guess is what I'm trying to caution people. Don't take them for granted. Do not disrespect them.
No, they're very dangerous.
Yeah, and don't underestimate them, because you're right. It's like you're dealing with a wild animal but it's highly intelligent. They're very, very intelligent. And the really bad part about it, I think, where we for the worst part of this whole situation is that the majority of human beings are in denial that this is even a problem. So why would you solve a problem?
That. They love that.
Of course they do. I think they orchestrated it that way.
Yes.
Right. I do believe. I know I've said this before, but I'll just say it again. In biblical terms, they say the devil. One of the greatest tricks the devil ever did to mankind was convincing us that he doesn't exist.
Yes.
And I found that there's a portion, a very important line in the Lord's Prayer that has been edited. The part where you say, "Lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from evil." The full thing is there. Lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from the evil one and his minions.
Wow, that's interesting.
I think it's extremely important, because see, if people focused on that, they'd ask the question, "What do you mean, the evil one? Which evil one? What do you mean his minions?" It's like religion has. I think it's been completely hijacked in that regard. It's failing to do what it was designed to do. Look, I know we're physical beings, but we also have this spiritual component or non-physical aspect to ourselves. Like you heard something non-physical affecting the physicality in that room that day, that so-called electricity.
Yes.
Right? And my whole thing is that energy is consciousness. It's like this. Consciousness, pure consciousness, at a lower vibratory rate is energy, and that same energy at a lower vibratory rate is matter. It's all the same thing. Physicists are kind of saying this in another way. Everything came out of a singularity and a Big Bang, right? So it all had to be the same source at one point that then disassociated into all these various forms, but it all came from the same thing. And look, I didn't make this up. It's called digital physics, and it's relatively new on this world, but I think it's actually ancient throughout the universe. There's higher intelligent life forms that they not only do they understand it, they use it. And this is how things are manifest. I really believe that that's why we've been taught or programmed, conditioned into believing that everything that we imagine, that we can visualize in our mind, is just an illusion. And it's not true at all. Everything you see that you think is physical, which it's really not, right? We know that matter is just frozen energy. The thing is, like I said, they don't know where all the energy is coming from yet. Or at least they're not allowed. We're not allowed to know that openly. But as I said before, that's the way I see it. So again, if it's all about consciousness, don't you think that the key to this whole thing, our personal relationship with that, would be in our consciousness? The mind, as it were, not the brain, but that thing, wherever it is that we visualize, that we hear our own voice, that we can see things, like I said, look, a car doesn't just make itself, right? And even if a human being wants to make a car or anything else, you have to visualize it in your head and then take that visualization, whatever it is, that image, and put it down on paper and hand it to somebody else. And the process repeats itself, and I'm telling you, when it says, can you conceive of something, it's a very literal statement in my book.
Yeah, and those thoughts have an influence on the other side, and I didn't realize how much of an influence, because one of the things that, I do when I hear those voices, or when somebody else has told me they're having voices, I can actually feel their presence. I can't hear them, I can't see them, but I can feel them, and it's this icky electrical coldness. Mm-hmm. And if I imagine very vividly that these things are being blown out of these people and trapped in a box of light, then they don't have the physical effect on them. I had one guy that was breaking out into a sweat.
Yeah.
But they still can talk through that wall of light. So if you visualize them being duct taped, their mouths duct taped, and they're in that prison of light, they shut up.
Wow.
They shut up. And the prisoner, or the patient goes, well, how'd you do that? Well, I didn't do it. I asked for positive spiritual forces to come and help do that and then ship them off. But if they don't change the way they're living, they will be back. And just like the Bible said, they will be back in force with more than they had in the first place.
Yeah.
So if they keep along that same negative path, they're going to be reinfested with even more.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. You can't violate the person's free will. But if they're asking for help, then you can do whatever, or you can ask for assistance. Like the saying, heaven helps those who help themselves, and heaven doesn't intervene in those who don't want to be helped. Right? That's a very interesting aspect of it.
Well, it's really strange because they know these things are demons. They know that they're tearing them up. But when you tell them, hey, listen, you've got at least 2 guardian angels, but they're not allowed to help you unless you ask,
right?
They have a harder time with that. So they can see the negative side, but they can't. And you tell them, well, these guardians have to sit there and watch you get your butt kicked.
Wow.
And they can't interfere because they're not allowed to interfere with your free will. And if your free will is to get your butt kicked by these demonic monstrosities, well, then they have to sit around and watch that take place. Right.
Yeah, because it's your agreement, or I should say it's the patient or whoever we're talking about here. They have an agreement with those entities. And
then they have a right to be there.
Then they actually, yes, you've given them permission, and the angelic ones don't interfere that way. I mean, I think they might intervene in an absolute extreme case. They might intervene.
I've seen that.
But
when your life depends on it.
Literally when your life depends on it. And I think I told you about it, but I'm going to briefly mention it again. The one time that these things got to me so bad that I really thought I was going to kill myself. I really felt that way. I was 20-something, and it's the only time I felt like that. But anyway, I sort of planned it out, and more or less, I thought I was just going to jump off a cliff. Why not? I figured if I did it right, it would be pretty much over. But when I hit the ground, that'd be the end of it. And the reason I felt that way is because they had convinced me. Not only they were watching me, everything. Not only watching me, they knew what I was thinking. And that really bothered me. I felt like I had zero privacy, and I started to lose hope. I felt so alone. I really did. I mean, I just had no support whatsoever. And so I go up to this place with a friend. He didn't know what I was thinking, right? But I was very ill at the time, too. And it was like bronchitis or something, borderline pneumonia, a really bad chest problem, and running a fever, and I was just ready to end it. And go up to this place. It's freezing ass cold, and I'm sleeping out on this creek, river. No, it's more like a creek. All right. And I'm literally, there's snow on the ground. And beautiful wilderness area. And the middle of the night, I had one of those lucid dreams where I woke up. Okay. I knew I was, and I woke up exactly where I was. But I assumed it was just a dream, okay, because, well, it's bizarre. There was some woman over in a grove of trees, standing by these trees, and so I noticed her because she was dressed in some sort of white garment, like a robe, okay, and I'd seen other beings like this before, and I thought, okay, what does she want? So I went over there. And she says to me, she had the most unusual crystal with her. She held it up. She said, place your hand on the crystal. So I did. And when I did that, it was like jump-starting a car. It was amazing. The energy that ran through that, I guess it was from her, but the crystal was amplifying. I don't know exactly what it was all about. But that's the best analogy I can give. And it shocked me, but in a good way. It was like literally charging me back up to where I needed to be in order to survive physically. Then she said something to me that I'll never forget. She said, if you decide to stay, we'll do everything we can to help you.
Wow.
And I thought, whoa, that's exactly what I needed to hear. Because that's the only reason I'm standing here thinking about throwing myself off a cliff in the morning. You
felt isolated.
I felt drained. And I felt completely cut off. So What was my alternative? To live in a shithole, full of these entities that are running around manipulating people, trying to mess with me too, especially me, because now I was seeing them. I was like, oh, God. Anyway, when I woke up in the morning, the thoughts of killing myself were gone. 100% gone. And so, obviously I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if that hadn't happened, because everything, it was like literally 180 degrees. And so I felt that, you see, though, it wasn't, they tend to be very much in the background, and only, and it was really subtle the way they approached me. I mean, like you said, they're always around, but it was weird. It's like they knew that if they didn't intervene on some level, and again, you see, the choice was if you choose to stay, not you need to stay.
Right. You have the choice.
We're going to honor your ability to make a choice. Hopefully you'll make the right one. And if you do, then we're going to, as if they weren't anyway, it was more like a reminder, but it was shocking to me, and I still think of it often when I say the Lord's Prayer at night. I think it's one of the things that I customize the Lord's Prayer to work for me, and I always thank the Lord for sending these angels of light to guide us through our journeys here. Oftentimes they're unaware, and that's the way they want it. That is the way they want it, because they know that we will worship them, and they don't want that. They don't want that at all.
I had one incident. I mean, it wasn't as powerful as yours with the actual person and actually being able to see it. But when I was going for my commercial pilot's license in sailplanes, these are gliders that don't have engines. And one of the things we had to do was do an emergency landing where you had to stop that plane in 250 feet from the moment you touched down. So that plane had to fall out of the air on the first cone, and you drive the nose and had a steel skid. You drive that nose into the ground, and that tail comes up, and you're actually plowing the dirt runway. It's an emergency stop. And if you go past 1 inch past that second cone, you fail.
Huh.
And it was very difficult. I mean, just it took a lot of practice. But I chose this instructor he's an ex-Marine, he's a power pilot, he's a sailplane pilot, and he's very tough. But what I didn't realize, he had this humongous ego.
Yeah.
And what happened is the FAA instructor had to come from a major city some 200 miles away to give a flight exam. So if you failed that commercial flight exam, he goes out to the sailport and he would just start telling everybody how stupid the instructor was. I mean, because he had to come all this way and the student wasn't ready. So this guy I chose, he didn't want that to happen to him at all. So he kept making things harder and harder. So one day he comes over and here we are, we're going to practice these commercial landings. And he goes, "You're flying from the back seat." And I said, "I'm what?" "I can't see anything from the back seat. Your fat head's in the way."
Yeah.
I can't see out the front of the plane. He goes, "You're flying from the back seat." He's making it as difficult as possible. And I'm going, well, okay. So here we're on final approach, and I'm carrying more altitude than he thought I should. And I always carry more altitude because you can lose it almost
You can't gain it. You can't gain it in a sailplane, no. Yeah.
That's right. You got no engine. You can't get it back. Once it's gone, So, you can turn that plane sideways. You can pop the air brakes. That thing will drop like a rock.
Yeah.
So I wasn't worried about being too high. So here I am coming in on final approach. I'm bobbing back and forth, trying to look on each side of his head where that fluorescent cone is, some 500 feet down below. And on final approach, he says, "Okay, where are you?" And I say, "Well, I'm high." And he goes, "Give me the plane." And I'm going, what a bizarro. He makes me fly from the back seat.
Yeah.
I know I'm high. And then he takes control of the plane. I'm like, what's he thinking? And next thing I know, he stalled the plane.
Uh-oh.
We are no longer flying. The dive brakes are full out because I had those extended.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there like frozen. And the plane is on a 45-degree angle on a collision course with the ground. We're going to both be dead in about 15, 20 seconds. And this guy's just sitting there rigid, and he's not flying the plane. The plane is stalled. The dive brakes are full out. And I'm looking at him. I'm like, did he have a heart attack? Did he have a stroke? What's going on with him? But he's sitting there rigid, And I know it's against federal law to take any control once he says he's got it.
Yeah.
But I told him, I said, "Jerry, I'm closing the dive brakes." So I closed the dive brakes and locked them. And then after that, this is totally unusual for me in an emergency, on the motorcycle, scuba diving, flying, whatever. I'm doing something. I'm doing something. And it was like I drank, half a bottle of tequila. I just had this super mellow feel come over me. And it wasn't in words, but it was, like this knowing. It was like, sit back and watch the show. Everything's going to be fine. Just sit back and watch the show.
Wow.
And we're going down, 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 and this guy still isn't flying the plane. And I'm sitting there going, how could this be? And somehow we went from being lined up on the runway to being perpendicular to it, which means, the runway was 35 feet, thick. Yeah. And on the other side was a ditch and a big berm. You can't stop that thing in 35 feet. It takes 250.
Right.
It's a 800-pound sailplane, probably the heavier than that with the two of us in it. So finally he starts flying the plane, and I'm not upset at all. It's like it was this weirdest sensation. I knew that we couldn't make it down in one piece. We were going to be seriously hurt. We're going to crash that plane. And on the other hand, here's this feeling and this absolute knowing that everything is going to be fine, but it couldn't be.
Right.
And then he finally starts flying the plane, but we're so low that we flew through the top of a Palo Verde tree. And I have the back window open, and I watched the strut cut a branch off that tree, and it just goes whizzing by my head.
Whoa.
And now we're perpendicular to the runway. We've lost a lot of energy because he cut the top of this tree off.
Yeah.
And here's this barbed wire fence coming up that we have to clear before we can even get to the runway.
Uh-huh.
So I'm sitting there going, we're going to make it. No, yeah, no, yeah, maybe. We had to clear that barbed wire fence because the only thing we had in front of us was that little, quarter-inch plexiglass windshield.
Yeah.
And that ain't going to stop a sailplane, and it's going to cut our heads right off. Mm. So, but the feeling, it was just like calm as a cucumber. It was like I was drunk or something. It was, but with clarity. and it was this knowing kept coming up and going, sit back and watch the show. I mean, it didn't say it in words, but it said everything's going to be okay. Sit back and watch the show, and it was this absolute knowing that everything was going to be okay, but it couldn't be. So looking out of the plane, we're low, we're real low, and I was wondering whether we're even going to clear that berm. The barbed wire fence. And even if we cleared the barbed wire fence, you can't land that plane on 35 feet. There's a big ditch on the other side, and then a big berm. We're going to plow into that, and that plane is going to just crumple, and he's going to be dead, and I'll probably be lucky if I survive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason. I mean, the absolute reason. I mean, you look at it and, hey, this can't be okay. So we finally clear that fence, and then suddenly he jams full right rudder, and the whole side of the plane is faced in the direction that we're flying. So the plane is no longer flying. It's a giant air brake, and it falls 25 feet straight down and bangs into the runway. And here's this explosion of dirt and rock, and I'm going, oh, my God, the landing gears collapsed. The wings are broken off, and the thing just balances for a second. Once it hits the ground inside of this big cloud of dust, and then the wing just falls over like a dead bird, and we're both just sitting there, stunned. Wow. And I'm looking at him, and I'm going, what the hell did he just do? I mean, why did this happen?
Yeah.
And none of us are saying anything. So he opens the canopy after about 30 seconds. We both step out of the plane, don't say a word to each other, and we slowly start circling the machine. And we make a complete circle, and there is not a scratch on it. There's no damage to the landing gear. There's no folded wings. There's not even any tear in any of the fabric. That plane is perfectly in good condition.
Wow.
And it couldn't be. You can't drop a 800-pound sailplane from 25 feet and expect no damage. And people are running from the sailplane porch, going, hey, man, they just crashed. They killed themselves. And we're standing there looking, and I look at him and I said, Jerry, what just happened? And he looks at me and he goes, I don't know.
Yeah.
He wasn't that good a pilot. He didn't land that plane. Something else did that through him, because I flew with him in Civil Air Patrol also. And every time he'd come into the air control area of this big city nearby, he would freak. He was not that good a pilot. He didn't fly that plane, and he didn't even know what happened or how he did it.
Right. Well, since you brought up that story, when I was younger, and I'm thinking, I don't know, 12, 13, whatever, I was my uncle was a fighter pilot in World War II in the Pacific. And one of the things I was pretty envious of the fact that he was a pilot. Okay, and so he says, "Well, look, I'll take you out to do the sailplane." I think he called them gliders, but same difference. It's just for people who don't know. It's just a small two-seater that has no engine, and you tow it up, and then you detach, and then you come down. It's a pretty simple procedure, and a lot of times this is the first step for people who want their private pilot's license. So I was pretty jazzed about the idea, and we went out there, and one of his sons met us out there, and he ended up going up, and by the time they were done, there was no more time for me to go up and try my hand at it. Obviously I would have just been maybe had the controls for maybe a couple seconds, and then he would have landed the damn thing. Anyways, I remember it very vividly. When you're talking, it's like I can visualize everything about it, the whole facility, the aircraft, and some of the hazards. So anyway, we're coming home. It's late. It's late, but we had to drive 3 hours from the desert to get back to Malibu. We're coming down this hill, and what had happened is some people were going up the same hill as we're going down. People in a Volkswagen went up the hill, lost power, and for some reason the driver panicked and cut the wheel the wrong way. And so instead of just gliding back on his side, like on the left side, relative to us, he turned the wheel really hard and came across with no lights, no nothing. He'd lost all power in the car, and it came across it seemed like out of nowhere to us, right? my uncle, and I think it was like a Pontiac Firebird, something like that. He was driving. He put that car like James Bond. He literally, we were going like 56. I mean, really, probably more like 65 miles an hour at the time, coming down that hill, and somehow he managed to put that the Pontiac up on two wheels to avoid crashing into this. I know, and it happened so fast, and because I mean, I'll never forget that feeling like, oh shit, we're gonna roll over here, and then boom, we were back on all four wheels. I'm like, God damn it, how did he do that? Now, over the years, I've always assumed that it was because he, pilot reflexes, but when I've talked to him about it, he goes, no way. He says, no way. He says, we had a couple of angels watching over us that night.
Wow.
That's what he swears to God, that there's no way. He says, there's no way. He says, we really should have all been dead. So who knows? Who knows? That's what Uncle says. And I mean, here's a guy who fought in Midway. He wouldn't kid around. In my opinion, he knows what a life and death situation is, right? I would assume as a pilot who's fought in combat like that, where he lost a lot of his friends, he was in the group called Satan's Angels. When a lot of those guys that made it back to the States formed a little club that you might know as the Hell's Angels.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, that's right. So now that's my uncle for you. For him to say something about angels is really ironic, because their logo, he showed it to me one time. He took me out to March Air Force Base, and he showed me the museum, and their logo was a black human-looking entity in the clouds that had red glowing eyes, and he was throwing down lightning bolts at people from the sky.
You know what? These guys that see the shadow people,
Yeah.
if they see their eyes, I mean,
Yeah,
you can tell how bad they are. If they see their eyes, the eyes are red or lime green.
Woof.
Yeah. Getting chills just thinking about it.
I know, me too. Me too. And I assume, I don't know this to be a fact, but I assume that people that are in combat probably do see things like this and they never talk about it because they don't want to, there's no place for it. And they don't want it.
Well, people think they're crazy.
Hey, look, I thought I was going nuts when I saw these things. You remember the boy I told you about somehow I knew that he was hearing the voices. Okay, that was why he was hurting himself, and that's why he thought he could fly. They were telling him that he could fly, and that's why how he was ended up cutting himself, almost bleeding to death. The reason I actually saw these things that were doing this to him, these parasites, is because I was in such it was like a war zone. I walked into this place, that room, I'll never forget it, because there was blood everywhere and glass, and the grandmother was standing there white as a sheet. She was utterly like a statue. She was in total shock, and so. My life wasn't threatened, but I'm telling you, that's about as close as I've ever gotten to a battle zone. And it really was. It was for that family. It was they were fighting for the life of that boy who was being tormented, and it was obviously scaring the crap out of the grandparents. They're having a feeding frenzy. Like I said, though, I don't think I would have seen these things if it wasn't for that heightened state of awareness, like like an altered state of consciousness. Simply because of the adrenaline or whatever you want to call it that was running through my body at that moment, like an extrasensory perception. So when it abated and I left the situation, and I started feeling weird. I mean, really unnaturally weird, like something was literally draining energy out of my solar plexus, which I never felt before. I've never felt that before. I don't ever want to really feel that again, but it's like I equated that to them, these things, whatever they were. And there was a bunch of them there. I mean, I know it was more than a few, okay, in the room, in the air. So at least that's what I wasn't seeing it with my, okay, let me preface this again. We don't really see things with our eyes anyway. It's all recreated as a hologram inside our head. Okay, so again, this is why it's so dangerous to think that just because you see something and somebody else doesn't, that it's your imagination or it's an hallucination. The ability to image anything is a gift. If everything's all about consciousness, then to negate part of our consciousness because it doesn't fit into a paradigm, which is probably a false paradigm anyway, or one that's being manipulated.
You look at ultraviolet light and all that spectrum we can't see, X-rays we can't see, all these things exist. We can't see them.
Well, normally we don't, but people that are in altered states of consciousness, whether it be through trauma or through drugs or combination of the both, right?
Right.
Or even ultra-low frequencies cause people to see things differently or experience things differently. So I do think at some point, though, we're not just having this idle chit-chat here. There's a purpose to all of this. And why don't you explain what it is that you think, your vision of how this is going to play out in the future?
Well, number one, I'm virtually certain that unless psychiatry opens their eyes and looks, I've talked to several of them and said, listen, one of the ways you can tell whether the person is faking or not is to ask them about the energy level.
Yeah.
If they say that they feel good when the voices go away or that they're happy when the voices go away, they're lying. All you got to do is open your eyes and look. Mm-hmm. And boy, you know what? I got this letter, this nasty gram that one of them sent to my boss that I was acting weird and in some kind of strange new age something or other. He was just raving, and I went to my boss and I said, hey, all he's got to do is open his eyes and look. It happens. It's there.
Yeah.
I said, I'll show you if you want to. No, don't worry about that. They were threatened by that,
Well, so how can the average person, what do you think the average person could do within their family or circle of friends? Anything?
I think one of the biggest things they could do, if they were having, they had a schizophrenic relative or member of the family, is something that Sherry discovered for herself that got her out, and it is that everything they say is a lie. Mm-hmm. Everything, and she would use that over and over and over again when they tell her, well, you're fat or you're ugly. That's a lie. That's a lie. Yeah. That's a lie. So it was like they couldn't get hold, because they have to get a buy-in, and they're relentless. They don't, I'd ask a lot of these guys, I'd say, well, why do you listen to them? And they said, one guy said, it's because they, they're so damn persistent, they seem, so they got nothing better to do, so they just.
Hey, for them it's survival. They're relentless because to them this is not a game. This is their survival. So of course,
right.
That's why they act that way. I personally feel like the first step is what we're doing right now, is identifying that there's a problem, because people typically will not act to solve a problem if they don't think there is one, right?
Right. That's like psychiatry. They don't think that there are evil spirits in these guys, so, they drug them, and those drugs destroy their central nervous system after a while. They get something called extrapyramidal syndrome, and they shake like a leaf, and they can't stop it. It's permanent neurological damage.
Wow.
So they're looking in the wrong friggin' direction.
Yeah.
And as long as they keep thinking that this is a chemical brain imbalance, they're going to keep everybody, they're really slowly poisoning these poor people that they're giving these drugs to. Yeah. So there is something to that. There is with long-term use, there's permanent neurological damage with these antipsychotics.
It's just dealing. Excuse me. It's just dealing with the symptoms, not really getting to the cause.
Exactly right. Once they stop taking those medicines, the voices come back.
Right.
So they don't have the cause. What they're doing is putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Right.
And they know this.
Well, I don't
They
know.
know. You ask them, you press them. They'll say, we don't know what really causes schizophrenia.
Yes.
They say it's a chemical brain imbalance. And then you ask them, well, what imbalance? What is imbalanced? You know, or there's not enough serotonin. Well, what is the normal level of serotonin? I mean, do you have a gauge, like an oil pressure gauge? You lift the gauge up and you see how much oil is in the engine? I mean, no, they don't have anything like that. It's this bunch of malarkey bullcrap.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a chemical brain imbalance. But what is imbalanced? There's so many different chemicals that they use in those neuroleptic drugs that are so different, but they all have the same effect. So basically, they're tranquilizers.
Yeah.
You know. So what? You know.
We got another caller on the line. Ed, did you have some question or comment?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment, and it's going to be like a question too.
Go ahead.
Hey, Dr. J.
Hello.
You're not going to believe this. I was out last night talking to this gal I know, and she's had nightmares. I've talked to her about this before, and I was questioning her about what the nightmares were, and they're recurring. And so I said, well, what are you seeing? And she goes, there's a dark man or entity, and I get scared. And I said, and I asked her what color the eyes were, and she goes, they're green.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I said, I said, well, that's obviously not a good sign.
Yes.
And you know, I said, well, you need to get rid of that. That's some type of an attachment you have. And she goes, oh, but I don't want to get rid of it. I said, well, what do you mean you don't want to get rid of it?
Yeah.
And we went back and forth, and I just kind of said to her, I said, you need to kind of fortify your own, you know, spirit on this, and take the reins and force it out, you know?
Right. So what'd she say? Did she agree?
She wasn't sure she wanted to do that.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm like, I couldn't believe it.
That's one of the first questions I ask the people that I'm thinking could profit from what I can tell them is, do you think these things are your friends? And if they say yes, I drop it right there.
Wow.
You know, I'll write up the report and send them over to psychiatry, and I will not say a word to them, because they're basically saying is they have the right to be there and that they don't want them to leave. And as long as they're saying that, those things are not going to leave, and nobody can make them.
Well, exactly. And I kept on pushing her a little bit, and I'm saying, this thing's not supposed to be with you. It's. She goes, well, I really think it is. It warns. No. She goes, it warns me of things.
Oh.
And all this other stuff.
Hang on.
Yeah,
What,
I
Dr.
had one
J?
prisoner who said that.
Really?
You know, he would say, oh, it tells me when these guys. One guy, he said, the voice said, hey, watch out for that guy over there. You know, he's gonna get in a fight with you. And a couple of days later, this prisoner was in the bathroom. He just took a shower. His hair was soaking wet. Had a comb, and he was wiping. You know, kind of swinging backward, kind of brushing the water out of his hair to his rear. And this same guy that the voices warned him about came through the door, and as he flipped the water out of his head, he hit that guy in the face, and that guy attacked him.
Wow.
So they use that to say, well, look,
you can trust us.
We can warn you about all this stuff. We know this stuff. You need to believe in us because what we told you was true. And then once they got you that way, then they tell you to do all this other rotten stuff to get you in deeper, because they think they're saying, we're protecting you, we're watching out for you. But yeah, at the same time, they're sucking them dry.
Wow.
Yeah, you know, I asked this gal, I said, well, when did all this stuff start happening to you? I said, what kind of an emotional trauma happened to you, or physical trauma at the time, you know, right before this started happening? And she said she was like 18 years old, and it was the night her grandfather died.
Oh, wow.
So then I'm like thinking, is this a disincarnate entity or a dead dude or something more?
With the green eyes? I don't know. What do you think, Dr. J?
Well, I'm not quite sure exactly what those things are. There was one time, it was like New Year's Eve. I was working in the ER, and this one meth addict who'd been injecting amphetamine for 20 years. He should have been dead 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Comes in on New Year's Eve, and he's, I asked him, all the guys used to say, "You seen the shadow people?" "Oh yeah, I seen the shadow people." And I started asking him about his experience with them, and he started telling me. He said one time, he said I asked him. He said they talked to me. And nobody had ever, up to that point, said they talked. There was only 2 patients in all the years I've worked where said that the shadow people talked. As soon as he said that, he had my attention. And I said, "What do they sound like?" And he mimicked this high-pitched, squeaky voice that sent shivers up my back.
Wow.
And then, the guy was shaking. He was shaking uncontrollably.
Yeah.
The whole time I was interviewing him. After he described the voice, he went stark, steady, just steady. He stopped shaking, and I'm looking at his eyes, and they were no longer his eyes.
Oh, God.
There was this deep, dark, cold hatred that was coming from those eyes, and it was just, something was telling me in the back of my head, don't break the stare it down.
Yeah.
And it went on for like 15 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. It was this dark, deep, dark evil. It was this cold evilness, and it's just staring at me. And this guy's stark still while this is happening. And then he just snaps out of it again, and he starts shaking again.
Wow.
And, that shook me up pretty bad, because whatever that wasn't him.
Right.
But he starts shaking again, and I asked him more about the shadow people. I said, tell me what they told you. And he said, one day he was out there, and he said they were telling him to jump in front of a car, that he wouldn't get hurt.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, what'd you do? And he said, I jumped in front of the car. And I said, what happened? He said, it knocked me all the way to the other side of the road into the gutter. And he said when he woke up, they were standing around him looking down at him, telling him to get up, that he was okay.
Wow.
And he got up, and he was okay.
Good Lord.
And then it came again, a second time. And this time it lasted like 30 seconds, and I couldn't deal with it
You mean
anymore.
the stare? Yeah.
That stare, and he went again stark steady. He was unable to control his shaking until that thing showed up, and then he was stark steady. And after that, it was like a 30-second stare down, and something was telling me, don't break, don't show any fear.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there staring at this, and it's like eerie. I mean, just eerie. It was like this cold hatred. Like the thing was, it would say, I'd rather slit your gut than talk to you another second. I had that feeling. And then he snapped back, and I said, okay, enough. And I sent him back to the psych nurse. She couldn't stand him for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
She just wrote what I put in my report and handed that in. She couldn't deal with him at all.
Wow.
So, that's the furthest I ever got with that. But, one of the things that I use as a marker is if the patient can see their eyes, they're in a lot worse shape than if they can't.
Right. Well, does that help, Ed? I hope.
Well, at this point, I knew the guy that was dating this gal, and, he told me the story. That's how I first learned about it, how she wakes up with these terrors.
Yeah.
Like she can't breathe and just crying and just scared to death. I mean, scared to death. And when she told me that last night, like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to get rid of it.
Yeah, there's something bad wrong there.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, too.
Something bad wrong there. So that's one of the things, that's one of the markers with schizophrenics, too. The voices cause the nightmares. Mm-hmm. That way they can't sleep. And when the voices are hammering at them, they do the same thing to the schizophrenics as we do to prisoners of war. They don't let them eat right. They keep them awake all the time. They keep them paranoid all the time, and it breaks them down until their suggestions start. They weaken their resistance.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just told this gal. I said I gave her this phrase. I said, I am asking that all benevolent energies that are all around me and all about me put up a shield of protection to protect me from any and all evil.
Good for you.
And I said, and I kept on repeating it to her. And I said, that's what you need to say. That's what you need to say.
Yeah.
And she didn't say it. So, hey,
No.
you can lead a horse to water, right?
Yeah.
No, I'd steer clear. The other thing they hate is the 23rd Psalm. They cannot stand the 23rd Psalm.
Oh, I'll have to look that up. I don't remember that one off the top of my head.
Yeah, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
They can't stand that. That's like burning them in the butt with a hot stick.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, they hate that.
Well, that's real interesting. How much percentage-wise, Dr. J? What do you think? I mean, can you tell between like a DFE, like what's known as a dark force entity, and just a regular human disincarnate?
Well, yeah. There's several different kinds. I mean, it seems like there's some kind of how do you call it? Like a military order. Mm-hmm. Because there was one time where I was working with this one guy, and we got rid of kind of two minor ones, and then all of a sudden this other one just appears out of nowhere, and it was very strong. Mm. So there's like an order. It's almost like they have different levels where one is commanding a bunch of others, and they're like assigned to destroy a certain person.
Wow. Have you had anything like poltergeist activity or anything move in the room or anything while you're kind of...
The worst was that crackling thing, where the room was crackling.
Right, like an electrical discharge thing.
Like an arc welder. And it just went on for a long time.
Wow.
The other thing I hear is when I know they're around is two cracks, crack, crack.
Hmm.
I know that the negative ones are around when that happens. But I have this feel for them, and that's one thing I use too. If I feel that cold, icky feeling, that's them, and there's no other feeling in my life that matches that.
Yeah.
So
do you ever get a pull? Do you ever get a pull on your solar plexus? Why any of this is going on?
Not that, but what I have had happen is after we cleared some of the prisoners of these voices, that night at about 3 or 4 in the morning, I felt I was being crushed down in the bed.
Wow.
Like something was physically crushing me in the bed. And boy, I started praying. It scared the devil out of me.
Yeah.
So they followed you home.
They followed me home.
They follow everybody.
Happened 3 or 4 times, until finally I talked to an exorcist, and he said, "Don't worry about it." I'm like, "What do you mean? Don't worry
easy
about
for
it?
you to say.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, it's quite frightening.
It scares me to death. I mean, you're sitting there, and there's something pushing you down into the bed. There was another time where I heard an explosion, like a firecracker, go off next to my ear.
Wow.
And it woke me out of a dead sleep. And my wife is still sleeping, but my son, I hear him in the other room going, "What was that?"
Huh.
So he heard it also.
Yeah.
And
wow.
She slept right through it. And it was loud. I mean, it was and that was again a night after we had cleared one of the prisoners there. So they're not happy campers.
Right. Right.
Well, thanks very much for the information. When I heard you say the green eye thing, I had to call up and tell you this story. So
thanks, Ed.
I enjoyed the program, and thanks for sharing, Dr. J.
You bet.
Take care.
Okay, have a great evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, so before we go, I just had to ask you your opinion about psychopaths.
Yeah.
Do you think that is simply just a choice, bad choices, or are these people under the influence of the entities?
I think they're under the influence of the entities.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
They don't feel, they don't feel any guilt. I mean, they can do the most horrible thing, and there's just, they don't, doesn't bother them.
Well,
they
live in a false reality too. Most of them, from what I understand, is that they don't understand. They don't see things for what they are. They're living some sort of illusion.
Well, yeah, one thing I saw working in the prison is, a lot of times I didn't even want to know what these guys did because it would affect what I thought of them. But when I checked into their backgrounds, I mean, it was horrific. They would be raped and beaten and burned and locked in closets, to the point where they just hardened themselves to any kind of suffering and cut themselves off from the suffering of others also. Sure.
But I mean, look,
I think they are possessed.
Yeah, I'm not trying to excuse the behavior by blaming. A lot of people have tried to level that charge at me, like, "Oh, you're excusing people's bad behavior by blaming it on demons," and I want to just be perfectly clear. I think we actually have a higher level of responsibility for our actions based on this model. If what we're saying is accurate, then it's even more incumbent upon people to take responsibility for their thoughts and deeds under this, this basically psychic warfare.
Well, what's going on is basically like the cartoon, where you have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and they're both competing, but you are the decider. And every decision that they make, that the evil entities put into their head, if they go along with it, they're moving more in that direction. I even had one to... I asked this one, and I think it was a female, had both good and bad, and I hear that sometime where you have a bad one, and then one of the things I check out with the good one is the good one ever say anything bad to you, and if they say yes, that's not a good one. But if they say no, they've never said anything bad, then that battle is right clear as a bell. So this lady kept moving in the wrong direction, just kept listening to the bad one, listening to the bad one, listening to the bad one, and then I asked her, when's the last time you heard the good one? And she said, well, it's been months ago. And I said, well, you've ignored her, and she, she's just kind of moved off because you're moving in the wrong direction. I said, ask her to come back and ask for her forgiveness, and then ask her to drive the bad one away. And she did, and the good one showed up, and it drove the bad one away, and she saw what happened, and she promised, hey, I'll listen to the good one from now on. But that doesn't happen often, but it does happen periodically where they hear two. One guy, he was hearing his mother, and I'd ask him, what this guy cleared. I mean, we got rid of the voices. I asked him, what did she tell you? And he says, well, wash my underwear and stay away from bad guys and brush your teeth. I mean, the kind of stuff that mothers would say. And I asked him, well, how does she react to the bad voices? And he said, well, she fights with the weaker ones, but there's one real strong one. When he shows up, she takes off.
Whoa.
I found that interesting. And then when the guy cleared, and we got rid of all the voices, and he wasn't looking to have them back, the mother showed up, and he said, my mother wants to talk to you. So here was another time, and I'm like, whoa. And I knew she was good, and I said, well, what does she have to say? And she said, well, thank you for helping my son. I very much appreciate it. And I said, well, you're welcome. And I said, what are you doing over there? And she said, well, I'm checking people in. I'm the secretary. I check people in.
Whoa.
And and I asked her another question after that, and she said, I'm not supposed to be talking to you. Everything you need to know is in the Bible. And then she disappeared.
On some level, we're all angels. And in that regard, like I said, we have a multi-phase existence, physical, spiritual, etc. But it all has to do with consciousness, making choices. It's all about relationships, both good and bad, parasitic and symbiotic, I guess is a better way to put it, because it takes some of the judgment out of it. But, Dr. J, I really appreciate what you continue to do, despite the the fact that you're not really getting a lot of support in the mental health profession that you work in, and please continue to do this good work.
Well, I'm not planning to quit. Although I take my lumps from the dark side,
I'm sure.
Periodically.
I'm sure, but I do appreciate you giving us some more of your time, and I hope you'll keep in touch. And please keep me posted on any new developments that you have.
Oh, yeah, I'll do so. There's a whole different area that we haven't even touched on, and that's, what to do about these things.
Right.
That took years of, finding out what they are and how they operate. So
okay, well,
we can do that another time.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that next year sometime when it's convenient for you. Okay, well, thanks again. You have a happy holidays, and
alrighty.
Be well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, folks. So you've heard it from the good doctor. I mean, believe it or not, this is a reality. This is the reality that we live in, and I know it's inconvenient. Nobody wants to hear about demons, right? But they do exist, okay? In my opinion, from my experience, from Dr. J's experience, from so many other people that you've been hearing about here on this program and elsewhere, obviously. I'm not the only one talking about it. But, yeah, that's I think it's highly important. So I hope you found this program to be of some assistance, or at least, at the very least, interesting. All right? Because I know it's not a pleasant topic. But as I said, people have to recognize that we all have a problem in order for us to actually resolve this issue at some point, right? Individually, collectively, that's what's the work that is ahead of us. So, thanks again for listening, and until next time, good night and God bless.